Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, December 3rd around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about the CFP tiers. I'm going to break it down for you guys. The way I see it, about two-thirds of the field is already set, and we got one spot that is going to be vied for between 5 teams as far as I see it. Then we'll get to the winners and losers from this past weekend. Michigan's Toughness, definitely a big-time win. Quote-unquote winning with class, definitely a big-time loser. Then we'll get into a little talk around the coaching carousel as well as the transfer portal. Definitely a lot of hires, a couple of coordinator hires at some big-time jobs, and then some big-time players that made it into the portal, including one wide receiver that I think is going to turn a lot of heads. Then we'll get into a little bit of a whip around, talk about all the teams we didn't have a chance to talk about yesterday. Want to highlight some teams. This is going to be the last time we talk about a lot of these teams, so want to make sure I get to them real quickly. And then we'll finish it off with my top 15 Tuesday. A lot of teams that have moved around quite a bit. Obviously, Miami dropped quite a bit, dropped out of my top 15 actually. So we'll break that down at the very end of the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can have fun back and forth. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those that you'd like to use, you're more than welcome to. But let's go ahead and jump into this, because it's gotten a little bit crazy. We've gotten a little bit clearer of the picture as we get a little bit closer to this playoff being a reality, but we still have about, as far as I see it, about 19 teams that are very much in the conversation here. A couple have already locked up their spots, but let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And I think when we talk about the playoff right about now, we're about to figure out tonight, obviously, where everything stands going into this weekend, and I'd like to think we'll have a good idea of who the 12 teams are going to be, given the different scenarios, by the end of the night. So we'll obviously talk about that tomorrow, but let's give you an idea of just the way that I see it, and we'll start with the teams that I think are just in. I think there's no doubt in my mind, no matter what happens this weekend, they're going to be in that dance in some form or another. And we'll start with Oregon. They've been in for a couple of weeks. We knew that going into the Washington game, regardless of what happened in that game, they were going to be in. They officially are playing now for the 1 seed or the 5 seed, as far as I'm concerned. If they lose to Penn State, I think they'll get the 5. If they win, they'll obviously stay at the 1 seed. So they're in a great position right now. They're obviously the team in the catbird seat. They will likely be the favorite going into that tournament, if I had to imagine. Then you do have Penn State. They're kind of in an interesting spot because if they were to lose this weekend, I think they're kind of in an interesting spot where maybe they would drop out of a host position. Maybe Ohio State would be above them at 10-2 compared to 11-2 with the win over them. There's a lot of different conversations here. So they could be the 1 seed, they could be the 2 seed, depending on what happens in the SEC championship. They could also be the 5 or 6. That's probably where I see them going, at least if they were to lose to Oregon. 5 or 6 is likely where I see them falling. Maybe they could fall a little bit further depending on the way that they view Notre Dame, the way that they view a couple of these other teams. So definitely something to watch. Obviously, if they get blown out by Oregon, totally different conversation. But the way that I see it, I think Penn State's playing for likely the 2 seed if they were to win. Granted, if Texas were to win, but the 1 or the 2 seed and then the 5 or the 6 is the way I see Penn State right now. Ohio State is it. I think there are a lot of people that would probably like for them to be left out at 10-2, but there's no doubt that they're in. They have beaten 2 of the teams that have their ticket punched right now, and they're absolutely going to be in that dance. I do think they're kind of in an interesting spot where they could host, they could travel. I think they're falling right in that 8-9 range, maybe 7, maybe 10, but they're in that position where it could go either way. I think tonight will tell us a lot. Maybe they can find their way up there if, maybe Georgia were to lose really aggressively or Penn State were to lose really aggressively. Maybe they could make that jump into the host position, but I feel like we'll have a good idea tonight where Ohio State will fall. The way that I see it, I think they should probably be the 8 seed, but I would totally understand if they were the 9 or the 10, depending on what happens tonight. For Indiana, they're firmly in. They were the one that could have been out with a loss, or probably would have been out with a loss this past weekend. They rolled over Purdue with no problem, and now they are firmly in that thing. Now, they're probably traveling. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think it's possible maybe they're in the position that Ohio State is in, but at the end of the day, with that head-to-head win, I assume they're going to fall somewhere between the 9 and 12 position, probably around the 10 or 11, if I had to imagine. Definitely going to be interesting to see where they fall, but as of right now, most of the predictions I've seen had them at the 10 position. I think that's probably a good spot for them, and that would put them traveling in the first spot, maybe to a Georgia or to a Tennessee or someone like that. Then you move over to the SEC. You got 3 teams there, and Texas is kind of in the Penn State position. They could be the 1 seed if Oregon were to lose and they were to win. They could be the 2 seed if they were just to win and Oregon were to win, and then they could be the 5 or the 6. I think it's possible they fall to the 7 seed, depending on the way, again, they view Notre Dame, and then we'll see what happens from there. But the way I see it, likely the 5 or 6 or the 1 and 2, depending on the outcome of the SEC championship as well as the Big Ten championship. But Notre Dame's kind of that wrinkle into all of this at the end of the day. Georgia is one that, as annoying as it was to hear a million times, Joe Tessitore was right. Georgia was in with a win this past weekend. They were able to get it, and now they're in a spot where I think they're kind of fighting with Tennessee for that possible host position, non-host position. If they were to lose the SEC championship, could they possibly fall out of that position? I tend to believe they're relatively safe there. I think they're probably playing for likely either the 2 seed if they were to win, or the 7 seed, something like that, if they were to lose. That's the way that I kind of see it right now. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Maybe Notre Dame could fall a little bit and they get up to the 6 seed. Who knows? But as of right now, I see them kind of slotting in as the 7 tonight, and then possibly up to the 2, depending on what happens in that game. For Tennessee, you're in, I think you could host. I think you're in an interesting spot, kind of battling with Ohio State as far as I see it for that last host position. We'll probably find out tonight who wins out on that one, but definitely something to watch, and could be one of those things that just comes down to how those SEC and Big Ten championships play out. Maybe there's a little bit of movement there, but the way I see it, you'll probably find out tonight. Is it going to be Ohio State or Tennessee hosting that last game? And then Notre Dame. They're firmly in the mix. They come back kind of from the dead in week 2. They now get to kind of hang out, and they're definitely going to be hosting a game for their first CFP matchup, so it's going to be a huge moment for them. They're definitely in a really good spot. Obviously, if Oregon and Texas were to win or lose this weekend, maybe some things could get shaken around, but as I see it, they're anywhere between the 5 and the 7. We'll see what happens there, but definitely a team that is firmly in the mix, and they're just kind of waiting on their couch, waiting to see what all happens this weekend and where they fall after this weekend. But those are all the teams that have their ticket punched. The way that I see it, we have 8 teams in those 12 spots. They are set. I don't think anything will change from this group. Maybe they view Tennessee a little bit differently than I do, but the way that I see it, these are your 8 teams. These teams are in no matter what. Then you have 6 teams, and they're in with a win, and that's the way that I see all of these conferences, where you have the ACC, the Big 12, and the Mountain West. Clemson and SMU, they're going to be battling out in the ACC championship. I think Clemson, you got a little bit lucky. There's no doubt about that. You got lucky. You got in with a loss to South Carolina, but now you're in a win-and-in scenario. If you win this game, you are firmly in the field. The question is, where would you fall? Would you be the 12 seed where Arizona State is? Would you be the 4 seed? Would you be the 3 seed? There's a lot of different questions. We'll see how hard that South Carolina loss hurt Clemson, how far behind they are from Arizona State and a couple of these other teams. Maybe there's a door open for a Clemson to be that 12 seed going up against a 5 seed at the end of the day instead of that Big 12 champion. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. So that's definitely something to watch. I think they're one of the teams that is a little bit fluid. We'll figure out what happens with them. Obviously, no at-large bid in play really for them, but definitely one of those things where they could fall in the 12 seed, the 3 seed, 4 seed, a lot of different placements for Clemson. For SMU, it's as simple as can be. I think if you win, you are the 3 seed. If you lose, I think you should firmly be in. I can't promise that you will be. I've made that very, very clear. An 11-2 SMU not getting into the field would be a total problem. So I firmly believe they should be in. They would obviously be traveling in that scenario, but if they were to win, would be the 3 seed. If they were to lose, then I think that conversation starts really fierce, and we'll figure out what happens on Selection Sunday. But Arizona State is the other one. Really, the Big 12 is the other one. Arizona State is off to Arlington and 1 win away from the CFP. They do have Iowa State standing in their way, and it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens there. Right now, they're slotted in at the 12 seed, but the way that the gap is kind of shrinking between them and Boise State could find their way up into that 4 seed, depending on what happens in that game. Iowa State in the exact same boat. I do think they're in a position where maybe they're a little bit less likely to get that 4 seed or to get that 3 seed at the end of the day, but they're still in a very good position, and I think they would likely be the 12. If they were to win, maybe Clemson would be below them, but definitely something to watch. That's going to be one of the more confusing ones to figure out as we get into tonight. We'll see which one of these teams, where all these teams slot, and we'll see how the effects will have. And then you got the Mountain West, and you got Boise State and UNLV. Boise State's been the top team all year. They're just trying to finish it off, and you likely would get a bye if you were able to win this game. I think there could be a little bit of movement for the Big 12 or for someone else, but the way that I see it, you're probably in relatively good shape to get one of those byes if Boise State were to win. If UNLV were to win, feel pretty confident they would be the 12th seed. I don't think there would be any movement there. I don't think there would be any craziness. Maybe there's a possibility that Clemson is below them, but I'd be very surprised. So I do think if UNLV wins, you're pretty much set with the 4 big-time conferences, get those byes. The Mountain West champion gets that 12 seed, and then everyone else kind of fills in where they're needed. But as of right now, if Boise State were to win, that obviously would set off a little bit of a different scenario in those 2 other conferences, the ACC and the Big 12. And then you have the bubble, the one that everyone's talking about right about now. You have Miami, you have the ACC loser, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. And frankly, I think there's an argument for just about every one of these people. Let's start with the ACC loser because I think that's the simplest one of the bunch. If the loser is Clemson, they are out. I don't think there's any doubt about that. A 9-4 team should not really be considered for the playoff. Then you have SMU. If SMU is the loser, I'd put them in, no doubt. Now, I can't promise that the CFP committee would do the same thing. I tend to believe they might lean towards that team in Crimson, but at the end of the day, I do think they should be in at 11-2. I think there's really no question about that. So that's the easy one to me. If it's Clemson, you can go ahead and knock them out. If it's SMU, then absolutely put them in. Miami, I think you're on thin ice, and I think you're in a really bad position comparative to these other teams. Don't necessarily have the ranked wins that all these other teams have. You have the loss to Georgia Tech, while a lot of these teams have some tough losses, so not necessarily going down on you too aggressively with that one, but the way that I see it, they're probably in the worst position. In this bunch, you can call it SEC bias. I totally understand that argument. As of right now, I think Miami's probably the one in the worst position. Alabama's probably the team, and as upsetting as that might be to hear, I expect them to be slotted in at that 11th seed tonight. If I'm being totally honest, I think they're in a really good position to possibly overtake a lot of the teams that lost this past weekend, including Miami, and find their way into the field. I understand the argument for South Carolina. They do have the win over them, and I can't necessarily overlook that. I don't think the committee can either, so definitely going to be something to watch. I think they will be the 11th seed tonight. I think a lot of people will be very mad about that. Then you have Ole Miss. I think they're in a weird spot. I think there's a lot of energy going towards South Carolina, even though they have the win over South Carolina. Feels like there's not a lot of energy towards Ole Miss, so definitely something that should make Ole Miss fans a little bit nervous. I tend to believe they're going to be the team on the outside looking in, and if that's the case, then I'd be a little bit surprised if South Carolina wasn't. I love South Carolina. I have really enjoyed watching them in the last 6 weeks. They've been a top 12 team in the country. I have no doubt about that. You can't lose to 2 of the other teams on the bubble and then expect to get in. You just can't. Now, that LSU game, you kind of got hurt. I'm not arguing that. You kind of got screwed a little bit. I'm not arguing that by any means. But you're in a position where you lost the 3 games. You lost to 2 of the teams that are on the bubble with you. You're in a really bad spot. There's really no other way to cut it. If I had it my way, I might slide South Carolina in there. But at the end of the day, when I'm thinking logically, I can't necessarily do that. So the way that I see it right now, you have 2/3 of the field totally filled. I think 8 teams are firmly in that thing. You have 4 from the Big Ten, you have the 3 from the SEC, and then you have Notre Dame. I think those teams are firmly in the mix. Then you have the conference champions from the ACC, the Big 12, and the Mountain West. That will bring you to 11 teams. And then you got the 5 teams for that one spot. If the ACC loser is SMU, you better put them in. If it's Clemson, you better not put them in. I tend to believe that if it is Clemson that loses the ACC championship, I think Bama would win out. I hate to say it, but I do think they would win out. I think South Carolina fans, I think Ole Miss fans, and Miami fans would be very upset. But at the end of the day, I think Alabama would likely win out in that conversation. We'll likely find out tonight. If Alabama slots into that 11 seed, a lot of people will be very mad in a hurry. I can promise you that. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about the winners and the losers from this past weekend. Winning with class took a little bit of a hit this past weekend, and we'll talk about it right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP tiers as I see it. I think we have about 8 of the 12 teams fully set. I think we're going to get 3 this upcoming weekend, and then one will be a big-time argument, and we'll see what happens there. I tend to believe the team that no one wants to see, Alabama, is likely going to win out in that scenario if I had to imagine. But let's get into the winners and the losers from this past weekend, because we got a lot to get to here. There's definitely quite a bit of losers from this past weekend, but we'll start with one of the winners, and it's been a winner for the last 3 years. It was a winner on Saturday. Michigan's DNA is very obvious. There's no two ways about what this team is. They are tough. They are disciplined. They are going to attack you. That's the way that they play football. They are going to get downhill, and it's one of those things where it's been that way for the past 3 years. So wasn't really anything going to change. Now, it was questioned just how good they were going to be. When Harbaugh left, when all those guys left, there was a question of how much of that DNA was going to stay with this team. You know, how much was Khalil Mullings going to carry on that? How much was this offensive line going to be able to carry on that? Because they lost quite a few guys this past year. So you're in a position where maybe your DNA was great. Maybe your culture behind the doors was great. Maybe everything you were saying about being aggressive and running downhill and being the enforcer was all the right things. Maybe you didn't have the ability to really execute that on the field, and that's what it looked like early on in the year. You know, in that Texas game, it looked like a team that couldn't impose their will, that couldn't push a team around, that couldn't do the things that last year's team and the last 3 years of teams absolutely could. And they showed on Saturday they still have that in them. They still have that fastball. They still have the thing that makes them Michigan and has really hurt Ohio State all really over the last 3 years. So you're in a position where Ohio State had advantages all over the field. There was very few positions in this game where Ohio State did not have the edge. I mean, you could argue O-line, you could argue interior defensive line, a couple of different things. But at the end of the day, Ohio State had advantages all over the field. When you get bullied, when your offensive line gets bullied to that extent and you can't or won't adjust, you are going to lose that game. 10 times out of 10, Michigan was the tougher team on Saturday. They've been the tougher team the last 3 years, and although Harbaugh's gone, although Blake Corum and J.J. McCarthy and all of these guys are out the door, the DNA is still there, and it's likely not going anywhere anytime soon, even with Bryce Underwood coming in the door. The loser was winning with class, as it were. There were a lot of different fights, a lot of different things going on this past weekend. Quite a bit of flag planting, as they call it. There was one in Columbus, there was Tallahassee, Chapel Hill, Tucson, all over the place. There were quite a bit of rumbles, if you will. There were quite a bit of people getting after each other, and my overall take is neither party really needs to do this. I think there's plenty of blame to go around with all of these different scenarios, but if you're planting a flag, I tend to believe that winning the game should be enough. I tend to believe that that should be all the message that you need to that other team, and them walking off the field with their heads down is plenty of a message. But at the end of the day, if you're getting the flag planted on you, you probably should win the game. You probably should make sure that they're not going to do that by winning the game. I don't know what conferences are going to do about this. I know the Big Ten gave them a little bit of slap on the wrist with a $100,000 fine, but at the end of the day, this is one of those situations where I don't know if you're necessarily fixing this problem. I don't know if you're necessarily getting rid of this anytime soon. I think the goal is just to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible and make sure that everyone is handling themselves as well as possible. Obviously, kids are going to talk trash. In these rivalry games, there's going to be moments like this. There's going to be things that happen like this. But at the end of the day, I tend to lean towards the winning with class crowd. I tend to be the one that says, win the game, walk off the field, and let them sulk in that. Let them sulk in kind of the silence of losing that game. understand the other side of it, though. So I think it's relatively a non-issue, other than, macing kids. Let's make sure we don't do that. Other than that, I think it's a relative non-issue. You'll see this from time to time. You'll see teams get after each other. As long as no one's hurt, as long as there's no craziness that there was at the Ohio State-Michigan game, I think we're probably okay. You can be upset about them winning with class, not winning with class. That's up to you. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things that as long as everyone's safe, you're probably okay with what's happening. I think it's one of those situations where a lot of people are very mad, and definitely not necessarily my favorite thing in the world, but one of those things that's probably going to come with college football one way or the other. The winner was rivalry hate. Although we did have a couple of things that went maybe a little too far in one direction, there was quite a bit of getting after each other. Let's put it that way. There was quite a bit of people all around the country really getting after each other. You see Colin Simmons right there getting after Reed Adams. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things where as long as these fights don't go too far, like I just talked about, we're probably okay. You want a little bit of anger, you want a little bit of vitriol, you want a little bit of hatred in these rivalries every single year. The question is, just make sure that it doesn't go too far. So the Alabama-Auburn fight, definitely a little bit too far. Went a little bit off the field, got a little bit too many people involved in that thing. In the Texas A&M game, Will Lee and a couple of those wide receivers were getting after each other pretty good. But they weren't necessarily doing anything too aggressive. They weren't necessarily doing anything that was outright dangerous, and they kind of let the guys play. I really appreciated that. I understand you have to draw the line somewhere, and it has to be drawn pretty aggressively. But at the end of the day, when you have these rivalry games, I kind of want the guys jawing at each other a little bit. I don't want them throwing punches. I don't want them getting after each other in that way. I definitely do want them getting each other's faces, having a little bit of hate in their heart, because that's what makes college football, and it felt that way on Saturday, no doubt about that. Then the loser is Ryan Day's Q score. If you don't know what a Q score is, just his popularity, because a lot of questions around Columbus right now, and a lot of things that Ryan Day has to figure out. Now, I will make this very, very clear. I think this is one of the 10 best coaches in the entire country. I think he's plenty of capable of breaking through what he has been dealing with at Ohio State. I think he needs a lot of different things to happen. I think he needs kind of a change of mentality when he goes into that Michigan game. Just think about it differently, attack it differently. I also think he needs a lot of the fans, a lot of the people around that program to kind of come back to him. And I don't really know how that happens. I don't know if you have to get to the national title. I don't know if you have to win it. I don't know what that looks like. Definitely something that all those boosters are deciding probably behind closed doors right about now is just how far does he have to get? How far does he have to get down that road in the playoff for us to feel okay about bringing him back in 2025? So you're in a weird position if you're Ryan Day. I think you pretty firmly have a job right now. You're in a position where you got to just coach playoff games. You got to just hope that you can win as many games as possible. You got to hope that the people behind closed doors are making decisions that benefit you in some way. So you're in a weird spot. There's no doubt about that. You want to make sure that you didn't miss out on this year that you spent quite a bit of money for and put a lot of energy into. So the way that I see it right now is it's going to be a really hard road back. If I were a betting man, I'd probably say Ryan Day is not going to be the head coach at Ohio State next year. Now, I can't promise that. I don't know what the conversations are behind closed doors, but I know that the goals were to beat Michigan, to win a Big Ten championship, and to win a national title. There's only one more of those on the board, and we'll see if they can get that one. If they can, then I expect him to come back. If they can't, then I think there's a lot of questions about what the future is for Ryan Day in Columbus. The winner was teams in new conferences. This was something that has kind of been unfolding really all year, and I feel like a lot of us were kind of just waiting for the other shoe to drop. We were waiting for a lot of the, classic teams, a lot of the teams that have been in those conferences for quite some time to kind of take over, but they never quite did. Texas comes into the SEC and gets to Atlanta in year one. Oregon into the Big Ten, gets to Indy in year one. ASU goes into the Big 12 and finds their way to Arlington in the number one seed in year one, and then SMU in the ACC. They've done an incredible job, these new teams in new conferences, and then you have Army in the American playing in their conference title. So a lot of new teams in new conferences that have really kind of staked their claim. Kind of helps out a lot of the arguments for the Big 12 or the ACC when it comes to the playoff, but at the end of the day, it's been absolutely incredible to watch, and it's one of those situations where you never really know what these teams are going to be. I don't think a lot of people pegged SMU as one of the teams in the ACC championship. I don't think anyone pegged Arizona State as the winner of the Big 12. I think a lot of people would have said Utah would have been the new team there, but it was the Sun Devils. So in a crazy, crazy year where a lot of these teams that people questioned going into their new conference, they were able to kind of send a statement in year one. The loser is the Group of 5 intrigue. There were some twists and turns towards the end of this year in the Group of 5, and we were trying to figure out who that last CFP team was going to be. Was it going to be Tulane? Was it going to be Army? Maybe UNLV? Maybe Boise State? There was a lot of intrigue going into last weekend, and then Tulane fell to Memphis, and a lot of that kind of went out the window where it's pretty much what happens in Boise, Idaho will decide who gets into the CFP from the G5. I really enjoyed the craziness that Tulane gave us, but I think you're in a position where no matter what happens in that game will decide who gets to the CFP from the Group of 5, and then you'll still have the American Championship between Army and Tulane that will be very, very fun, just won't be for that CFP spot that it felt like it might be for about 2 weeks ago. The winner in that is the 3-loss SEC teams. We talked about it, but Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, you're kind of given a second life after all of the craziness that has happened this year, particularly Alabama with the loss to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago. They were given a second life by a lot of the craziness that has happened. I think it's one of those things where I see the argument for all three. I think South Carolina has played the best ball recently. I think Ole Miss has that dominant win over South Carolina. Alabama has more top 25 wins than any of them combined. Also has the has the win over South Carolina as well. So I don't know what to make of this. I think my general argument is likely any third loss should probably eliminate you. I think we all understand that that's probably not the case. And when you have a 12-team playoff, 12 teams have to find their way in. That's just plain and simple. So you got to figure out a way to get 12 teams in. Maybe Alabama's that 12 team as much as people don't like that. Then you do have the preseason Big 12 voters. Wow, they did a bad job. And it's not necessarily me dunking on them because I probably did a terrible job as well. I'll go back and look at mine and give you guys an idea, but I can almost promise you I was quite far off about this conference, and so were the preseason voters. They picked Utah to win this conference, and they finished 14th. They picked Oklahoma State to finish 3rd. They didn't win a conference game, and they picked the two conference title participants to finish 6th and 16th. Very last in the conference. Arizona State was literally picked last in this conference. They're now with a chance to go to the CFP, win the conference in their very first year. And Colorado was picked to finish 11th, BYU 13th. So no one knew about the Big 12. Going into this season, it was essentially just throwing a dart at the dartboard blindfolded and hoping that you hit the right spot. It was absolutely insane. It was incredible to watch, and just got to hope that the last chapter is quite as good as those first 14 that we had, because man, it was a very fun conference to watch, and it shows you that the preseason voters, they did their darndest, but there was no getting a beat on this conference. I can promise you that. But an incredible week all over the place. There were tons of losers, especially in Columbus, Ohio. There were tons of winners, including in Ann Arbor and Michigan, but a lot of people that went up and down this past weekend. Alabama, obviously a huge winner. Obviously Miami, and sort of the ACC in general, a big-time loser. So definitely something to watch as we move forward. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, we got to get into the coaching carousel. We got to get into the transfer portal, because both those things started in earnest this week, and they've already had a ton of different twists and turns. We have some coordinator hires, some coaching hires, definitely some things I want to break down for you guys right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from this past weekend. Definitely quite a bit all over the place. And Ryan Day, firmly in the losers category, at least for the time being. We'll see if he can salvage that in the playoff. But let's get into this because it has started in earnest. The coaching carousel, we've had a number of hires over the past 24, 48 hours. The transfer portal, we've had a number of guys jump in, including some big-time ones over the last little bit. So let's get to this really quickly because it's that time of year. December is the craziest month on the calendar for CFB, and it has officially started. And it started down there in Tallahassee, where they had to make 2 new coordinator hires. Got rid of Alex Atkins, got rid of Adam Fuller, and now they have to rebuild that staff, try to rebuild what they had in 2023. And they started with Gus Malzahn. The UCF head coach has left there. He's resigned, and he's going to take the offensive coordinator job at Florida State. Definitely one of those things that kind of shows the state of college football right now. You really want to be a part of one of those big-time teams that has a path into the SEC or the Big Ten, and coaches are kind of telling you that. Also, Gus Malzahn probably not quite as into recruiting as he was back in the day, so definitely one of those jobs that looks a little bit interesting right now. I think it's a relatively good hire. Will be interesting to see how it all works out, how much he and Mike Norvell work together, how much it's Gus Malzahn's offense or Mike Norvell's. It'll be interesting to watch that unfold, but definitely a guy that can put together a really good offense, and especially with the talent they'll have in Florida State, will be a very fun thing to watch. But to me, they made the hire of the year thus far in the DC department. Tony White, the Nebraska DC, has been hired at Florida State, and really, really good one. I believe that only allowed 4.4 yards per play, good for 5th in the country this year at Nebraska. Really incredible coach, and a couple of the guys have already decided they're going to the portal to probably follow him there. It'll be really interesting to watch this one develop. I think this is one of the guys that you're going to be watching not only the next year, but the next couple of years, because this probably has a head coach written all over him. Very, very talented guy and just a huge hire for Florida State. Another coordinator hire happened over at Oklahoma. The new offensive coordinator for Oklahoma is going to be Ben Arbuckle, the offensive coordinator for Washington State this past year, and this is a very, very good offensive coordinator. The run game for Washington State was downright special. The quarterback run game is going to be huge for them, and it sounds like John Mateer might just be following him over there to Norman. Haven't heard anything necessarily concrete about that, but it seems like it's heading in that direction. John Mateer will jump into the portal, likely follow his offensive coordinator to Norman, and likely be the starter for Oklahoma next year. So definitely a very talented guy, one of the guys that I've enjoyed watching the most this year. Something to watch as you get into that. It does feel like Jackson Arnold's probably out the door. We'll see what happens there. If he is, then it seems like John Mateer is going to go ahead and jump in there and be the starting quarterback, and we'll see what happens. I think this is a fantastic hire. It sounds a little bit like Lincoln Riley. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing for Oklahoma fans, but definitely a really weird thing when I first heard him. But I think it's a fantastic hire. Will be awesome to see what he can do at the SEC level. Going down to the G5, we'll update you on a couple of head coaching jobs. Blake Harrell has been officially named the head coach, had the interim tag for much of the year after Mike Houston got let go early. Was a fantastic defensive coordinator, did a great job as the head coach. Definitely going to be a really fun name to watch, and a program that has a lot of upside if you can really tap into that potential around the recruiting world. Tulsa has fired Kevin Wilson. They've let him go, and it's going to be Ryan Switzer taking over. I don't know if that makes anyone else feel old, but it definitely made me feel old. I won't lie to you. Drake Kirkpatrick Jr. got me just a little bit. This one's a little bit crazier. I cannot imagine this, but definitely a name to watch. A very talented guy, obviously a very talented player, has done a great job at Tulsa in his short time there, and definitely will be interesting to watch to see what he can do. Maybe he'll get the job as the full-time head coach. It'll be interesting to see what happens around that Tulsa job going forward. Over at Temple, they made their hire with Casey Keeler, the Sam Houston State head coach. Did a great job with Sam Houston this past year. Got them very, very close to that Conference USA championship, but barely missed out on a couple of tiebreaker scenarios. Really, really good year for the Bearcats. Has won multiple FCS championships with Sam Houston before they jumped up, as well as with Delaware. A very, very good head coach, and definitely a guy that it'll be interesting to see what he can do up there in Philly. The last head coach, Stan Drayton, I liked a lot as he was coming in. Definitely a guy that has a little bit more head coaching experience than Stan Drayton did, so definitely something to watch as you go into that one. I think it's a relatively good hire. Temple's a relatively hard job, so we'll see what happens there. And then FAU, they made their hire, Zach Kitley, the offensive coordinator for Texas Tech. He becomes the youngest head coach in FBS. He's only 33 years old. this is a name to watch. This is a rising star in the industry. I don't think he'll be at FAU very long, if I'm being totally honest. I think this guy will turn that thing around pretty quickly. I think he'll get a job pretty quickly in the Power 4 level. Very talented guy and did a great job with Texas Tech's offense. I expect him to be a name that we're watching for the next decade in college football and maybe plus. And then you have a couple of openings all over the place. We talked about Gus Malzahn walking out the door at UCF. They're on the market for a new head coach. A lot of different people to consider here. I think one name to watch is Alex Golesh, the head coach at South Florida. Wasn't a great year this year, but a very talented coach that has a lot of respect around the community. I think Will Stein, the offensive coordinator up there at Oregon, is looking for his jump and was just waiting for that right opportunity. This might just very well be it. This is a very good job, definitely one that has quite a bit of upside. Obviously, having to deal with Florida, Miami, Florida State creates some problems for you in recruiting, but you still have a pretty good footprint there in Orlando, and definitely a team to watch that I think, given the right hire, could really take off. Then you have Mac Brown. He is walking out the door in UNC, kind of being pushed out the door. The way that they handled that, I did not like at all, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, the name that I see continue to pop up is John Sumrall, the head coach of Tulane. Obviously, we won't hear about that until the end of the week, likely once he plays that game and their fate is kind of sealed for the season. But that's the name I continue to hear. I think a lot of people will be in for this job. I think this is a really good job. I think UNC is the one on the market right now that I would probably jump at the most readily. I think there's a recruiting footprint there if you get the right guy in that door. So I think John Sumrall would be that. Definitely a lot of guys to consider for that job, and I think a lot of guys would do a great job there. Neil Brown has been let go over at West Virginia, and this one is a very interesting one because there's quite a few names that have popped up for this one. I've seen Rich Rodriguez pop up. I've seen Jimbo Fisher pop up. He is a West Virginian at heart and definitely would be very interesting. Definitely a guy that probably wants to get back in the sport. So maybe that's the hire that they make. I think there's a lot of different guys to look at here, but definitely one to watch. I think West Virginia is one of those jobs that it's really hit or miss. I think you can open a lot of doors there. I think you can do a lot of things. I think Neil Brown started to do that last year. Probably should have done a little bit more in the portal this last offseason to set them up for success this year. But at the end of the day, very incredible job and could be the weird hire of the year if it's Jimbo Fisher. Then we have Purdue. Ryan Walters was let go. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Probably won't have quite the net to pick from as everyone else, but I have seen Dan Mullen be brought up for this job. Brought up for quite a few jobs, to be fair, UNC as well. So definitely will be something to watch there, but maybe Purdue can get a really good head coach. If they get Dan Mullen, I think they could tap into what Jeff Brom had tapped into there in Bloomington or in West Lafayette. Definitely will be really interesting to watch and a very, very interesting job where it's going to be tough, no doubt about that, but you tap into the right guy, a lot of really special things can happen there. And then everyone's going to be watching this one. This is the one that would send a bomb into the coaching world. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't think it's going to happen before the playoff, obviously, and a lot of different things, but if it does happen, the floodgates will open. They will hire a big-time head coach from another program. That program will hire someone, and so on, and we'll have to figure out where we stand at the end of it. That will be the one that will throw a total wrench into this thing, and definitely will be an insane thing to watch. But as of right now, he has a job. I'm not necessarily saying he's not going to have a job, just saying if you were to get fired, that's when this entire thing explodes, and we'll have to figure out where we stand at the end of it. And then you have a couple other G5 jobs. App State opened yesterday. Southern Miss is another one that I think is going to be incredible. Central Michigan, UMass, a couple other ones that are definitely going to be really interesting to watch. Southern Miss, there's a lot of talk around Charles Huff right now. It'll be interesting to see what those are. App State and Southern Miss at the G5 level, I think are really good jobs if you tap into them the right way. And then we'll roll through the transfer portal here really quickly. Miller Moss is in the transfer portal as of right now. It sounds like Auburn, Iowa, a couple other teams are firmly in the mix for this guy. I know UCLA was in during his recruitment early on in high school. Something to watch there. Maybe Michigan gets involved in this one, but the way I see it, it's likely Auburn, definitely Iowa, and we'll see what happens from there. A couple other teams that'll be in the mix. I kind of like Auburn in this one, if I'm being totally honest. I think he would be a guy that I think Hugh Freeze would jump at. We'll see what other quarterbacks jump in, but definitely something to watch there. Caden Salter is also in the portal, the quarterback over from Liberty. This is a downright special athlete. He's had some issues with turnovers throughout this year, but definitely a guy that you can turn on if you're a run-first offense. This is probably the guy that you're going to want to tap into. I think that he will have an absolutely massive market for him out there. It'll be interesting to see where he signs on. Definitely a very talented guy, and I have to assume a power 4 job will open for him. It'll be interesting to see what that is and what the job is and what the offense is, because he has a pretty particular set of skills with the run game, but definitely a guy that I think is going to be really, really fun to watch, and probably the top quarterback as of right now, right up there with Miller Moss. And then we just got to talk about the Auburn quarterback room. It sounds like they're losing the top 3 guys this offseason. It sounds like Hank Brown and Holden Grenier are going to walk out the door into the transfer portal. Definitely something to watch. Hank Brown is a guy that I really like. I think the arm talent is pretty obvious on that kid, and definitely will be a name to watch. Peyton Thorne obviously is going out the door, and they just got to hit on whichever quarterback they're going to bring in. We knew that going into the year that this was going to be the year that they had to hit on one, and it just got a little bit more dire with the depth problem that they're probably going to have here in a second. Micah Hudson is another guy to watch, a 5-star wide receiver coming out of high school. He signed with Texas Tech and didn't necessarily catch on the way that a lot of other freshman wide receivers did this past year. He's finding his way into the portal, and this will be a huge one. A&M, LSU, I think Texas could get involved. A couple other teams that absolutely are teams to watch here. I think this is one of those guys that anyone would love to get their hands on. Very, very talented player, and although he didn't play too much at Texas Tech this year, definitely someone that, if you put him in the right system, could absolutely explode. Then Kevin Concepcion. This, to me, is the best player in the portal right about now. This dude is a factor on every single team in the country. I've seen a lot of different teams kind of talked about with him. I don't think there's anything really concrete around him yet, but I do see a team like Texas or a team like Alabama or Penn State needs a big-time wide receiver. I see them definitely getting involved with this one. His brother just decommitted from NC State and committed to Kansas State, so a couple of different things to watch there. Definitely a guy that he's getting a lot of calls right now, and a lot of big-time calls. I don't think there's necessarily one that he wouldn't like, frankly. It'll be interesting to watch this one. I think Alabama's firmly involved. I think Penn State will get very much involved. And then I think you see Texas and Georgia and a lot of other teams. This is a very special player, and whoever can get their hands on him is definitely going to want to. And then Julian Humphrey, a very talented player on the defensive side of the ball for Georgia. He got benched earlier this year, kind of recently, for Daniel Harris at that cornerback position, and he has found his way out. This is going to be a huge market. I think Texas is going to be in for this guy. I think A&M is going to be in for him. He's from the state of Texas, so definitely something to watch there. This is a very talented player. He did miss the mark just a little bit this year in some different areas on that team, but at the end of the day, a very talented player, a lot of great measurables, and definitely someone that is going to have a huge market. Is definitely going to be on one of the Power 4 teams, one of the big-time teams next year, if I had to imagine. So that's kind of where we're at right now. A lot of other guys that have jumped in and will jump in today and tomorrow, and we will update you on all of that as it opens on Monday. But a couple other things for the NFL draft here. Luther Burden is going to go into the NFL draft. Have to imagine he's one of the top 3 wide receivers off the board with Travis Hunter and Tedariah McMillan. Really talented kid, and frankly, whoever drafts him, you're getting an absolute dude. I think he might just have a gold jacket in his future. This dude is absolutely insane. And then Caleb Johnson, a remarkable player at running back. He is declared as well. He's RB3 in my mind. I think Ashton Genty and maybe Amarian Hampton are above him. A couple other guys that, frankly, this running back class is absolutely insane. This is one of the best pure runners of the bunch. He's absolutely incredible and definitely will be a really fun guy to watch as he gets into the NFL. But that's where we stand right now. We just got into the month of December. There were much more to come. I promise you that. We will keep you updated as it does, but a couple of big-time hires at the coordinating positions and a couple of big-time players, including Miller Moss, finding their way into the portal. Definitely something to watch as we move forward, and we'll keep you updated as we do. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into a little bit of a whip around of a couple other teams that we're probably not going to be able to talk about throughout the postseason. Obviously, a couple of teams finished their seasons this past week, so want to give some love to some teams that had some great years, that didn't have some great years, but are going into big-time off seasons. We'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different portal news, some of the coaching carousel stuff, a little bit of NFL draft stuff just for fun, but a lot of different stuff happening right now in the world of the portal and coaching carousel. We will keep you updated with all of it as it does, but let's get to a little bit of a whip around. I want to talk about some of the teams that were a little bit overshadowed this year. We're a little bit under talked about. Ole Miss is not necessarily one of them, but wanted to talk about the Egg Bowl before we got out of here because this was a very, very interesting game. It was one of those that the Rebels were able to get a win, were able to get a relatively comfortable win, but Mississippi State was up 14-10 at halftime, and you were looking up thinking, there's no way Ole Miss is going to lose this game and fall fully out of the CFP race. But they finally found a way to get it done. Ole Miss kind of pulled away with an 89-yard touchdown from Ulysses Bentley and never really looked back. I think a lot of remarkable things about this Ole Miss team. Obviously, came up a little bit short of their goals this year, but Jackson Dart set about 1 million school records for Ole Miss this year, breaking a lot of Eli Manning's numbers. Really remarkable player, and obviously leaves school as one of the most impactful and best quarterbacks in Ole Miss history. Really remarkable stuff, and although you didn't necessarily get the ultimate goal this year, a really successful season for Ole Miss. For Mississippi State, I think is a huge offseason. I think that's going to be one of the teams that you see be very active in the portal and very active all over the place. Definitely a team that I'm watching going into 2025. I don't necessarily think they're going to scale into an SEC contender. Could scale into a very interesting team, and definitely one where if you have Michael Van Buren and Kevin Coleman on that team, a lot of special things could happen on that offensive side of the ball. Then you got Illinois. They were able to finish their season 9-3 with only losses to Oregon, Penn State, and Minnesota. Really remarkable stuff from Brett Bielema and company. I mean, they were one of those teams that coming into the year you didn't really know what to expect from. Luke Altmaier coming back, but didn't play all that great of football last year. He played great football this year, but in this game, it was Aiden Lottery. He absolutely dominated the day, had 12 carries, 172 yards, and 3 scores. Pat Bryant was a problem on the outside again. He's just that guy on the outside, and Illinois was one of those slightly overshadowed stories. With Indiana in the Big Ten, they stole a lot of the spotlight, but it was really remarkable to watch what Illinois is and really elite coaching happening over there. Definitely a team that I think can build into something special next year. Obviously going to have to hit on a quarterback with Luke Altmaier walking out the door, but a lot of really good talent there, and definitely a team that and a program that I'm going to be watching going into 2025. Louisville, Kentucky was a little bit of a beatdown. It got really ugly for Kentucky, and another disappointing year for Kentucky. They finished 4-8 after a lot of energy going into this one. A really, really stout defense, a defense that gave them the chance to win a lot of the big-time games that they played. They couldn't quite get it done. Louisville, on the other hand, they got dudes at running back, especially for 2025. Isaac Brown almost went for 200 yards and 2 scores in this game. Duke Watson went for 100 yards and 2 scores in this game. Those two guys are both freshmen. They're going to be absolute problems, and I think this Louisville offense, I also saw Miller Moss was looking at Louisville. If that's the offense that they have going into next year, that's a team that can compete for an ACC title, possibly get into the playoffs. So definitely going to be a really fun team to watch for Kentucky. Just got to try. I just got to try to rebuild it, see what happens in the portal. I do think Cutter Boley is going to be a fantastic quarterback, so maybe you have that position handled at least before you get into the portal, but definitely a lot of things that are going to have to happen with a ton of guys walking out the door in Lexington, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Duke was able to finish their year 9-3 very, very quietly with SMU and all those other teams in Pitt and a couple other teams running around the ACC. Duke was just very quietly going 9-3 this year. Really remarkable stuff, and a remarkably bad defended Hail Mary from Wake Forest gave them that. Jordan Moore got them the win late in this game, but they were down 17-3 late in the third quarter. They were able to battle back. A fumble on a kickoff by Wake Forest gave them that opening, and they ran in and took it. I think Manny Diaz has done an incredible job this year. He's definitely a guy that I think should be up for that ACC Coach of the Year. Rhett Lashley's going to win it, I have to imagine, but as of right now, I do think Manny Diaz should deserve some respect, and I think when you look at the other schools in North Carolina, there's an opening here. Duke's not necessarily the team that you would equate with dominating North Carolina football, but the way UNC is right now, the way NC State's playing, maybe there's a little bit of an opening for Duke to become that interesting team in North Carolina and maybe make a little bit of a run in the ACC next year. Kansas and Baylor was a very interesting game because going into it, everyone was watching Kansas. Everyone was watching that team that had been such a thorn in the side for so many big-time teams, and then Baylor just took him to the woodshed. They went to absolute work, and Dave Aranda deserves a lot of respect because about halfway through the season, it felt like he was pretty much gone. It felt like it was wrapping up for him over there in Waco after a really incredible start. That did not end up happening, and Sawyer Robertson is a great reason for that. He had 310 passing yards, 4 scores in this one. Bryson Washington just topped 1,000 yards this past weekend. Baldwin and Cameron on the outside are problems. They did an incredible job kind of rebuilding this offense midseason and being able to get the most out of it. Sawyer Robertson is definitely a guy that was a little bit under the radar this year, but definitely had a really incredible year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with him next. I believe he has another year of eligibility, so if that's the quarterback for Baylor next year, definitely could be a really interesting team. But Kansas' magical run comes to a little bit of an end before that bowl game. Was really an incredible year and really an incredible turnaround from Lance Leipold and the boys. I think it was one of those years where a lot of things went wrong early. That's kind of just the long and short of it. You know, you obviously want a couple of those games back, but there's still a team that I fully expect to be right back into the mix in 2025. I think Lance Leipold just too good of a coach to be held down for that long. NC State was able to top North Carolina, and this was one of the brawls that we saw this past weekend. It got very, very intense, but Hollywood Smothers kind of started that with 25 seconds left when he scored to finish off the fourth quarter that had 32 total points in it. It was absolutely back and forth, absolutely crazy all over the place, and the news here obviously is that ends the Mac Brown era over at UNC, ended on kind of a rough note. Definitely one of those games that you would love to win, send them out on the right note, but it was rough, pretty much start to finish, and even a little bit after the game. It was a rough note, but definitely one of those things where I think UNC handled this pretty terribly. If you saw Mac Brown's comments this past weekend talking about how they wanted him to resign earlier this week, they wanted him to resign on Friday before the game, there were a lot of things that I think they just did not handle this well. This is a very legendary coach. Let him coach out his contract. But at the end of the day, they're in a position where they're now looking for a new hire. For NC State, they're in a position where a lot of things went wrong this year. For a year that felt like it was going to have everything moving in the right direction, possibly you got 9-3 season and making a little bit of a run, did not quite happen. You do get to a bowl game, and I think CJ Bailey is going to be a really special player in 2025, so you might just have the quarterback figured out. You got a lot of other stuff to figure out with a lot of those playmakers you brought in, likely walking out the door, including Kevin Concepcion, a lot of things to figure out over there in Raleigh. Florida was able to just essentially just take over Florida State in this game, as just about everyone else has this entire year. We had Mike Norvell tossing a flag to the side. We had an argument between the coaches. We had a little bit of a brawl after the game. It was a rivalry. There's no two ways about that. And DJ Lagway continues to make ridiculous plays. His box score was not necessarily jaw-dropping by any means in this game, but he made a couple of plays that were just absolutely ridiculous. In every sense of the word, he just tossed a defensive lineman off of him and completed the pass. I don't know how he does it. He's an absolute freak of nature. Cannot wait to see what he can do in 2025. And really remarkable stuff from Florida overall. Those 5 games that we talked about really all year, going into the year and throughout the year, those 5 games at the end of the year that we said are going to be remarkably tough, and we don't know how they're going to be able to win even one of those games. They ended it at 4-3. They walked out of it 7-5. So they went 3-2 in those games, beating Ole Miss, beating LSU, beating Florida State. Obviously, the Florida State one's not quite as impressive as the others, but really impressive stuff from Billy Napier and that staff. And Florida State, you have the biggest offseason of just about anyone in the country. It'll be really interesting to see what they do. A lot of different portal moves, a lot of different recruiting moves, a lot of things that have to happen at Florida State over the next 8 or 9 months, and if they don't, then Mike Norvell's clock is officially ticking down there in Tallahassee. And then Oklahoma. I have the scores a little bit flipped here. LSU won 37, Oklahoma 17. Apologies for that, but LSU was able to finish their year on a win in a 7-5 season after 3 straight losses before that final 2 weeks. They were able to beat Vandy, able to beat Oklahoma, kind of salvage this year, make it look just a little bit better than it ended up being. They end 8-4 and make this look clean at the very least. And this LSU team, they seem to be the team that's going to return tons of production next year. This offseason, it feels like a lot of guys are going to come back. At least that's the scuttlebutt that I've heard. Nussmeier could come back. It looks like Emory Jones is leaning that way. The really talented offensive tackle, Mason Taylor, the tight end, looks like he's leaning that way. So could be a huge year for LSU. As much as this year was very upsetting and not what they wanted, I think 2025 is shaping up to be a really interesting one. Oklahoma, they moved into 2025 about halfway through this year, if I'm being totally honest. They are in a bowl game, so we'll get to see maybe Jackson Arnold, maybe someone else. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it'll be a lot of change around Oklahoma this offseason. I think they will have a new quarterback. They obviously will have a new coordinator. They will have a lot of new things around there, and will be a very interesting team to watch in the SEC in 2025. A lot of talent already there in a lot of different places, but I have to assume they're going to be one of the bigger movers when it comes to the portal in and out of that program. So definitely something to watch there, and we will obviously update you on all of that as it unfolds. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about my top 15. A lot of movement, I'll be totally honest with you. A lot of different things that I'm fighting myself on even as we speak right about now. The Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina conundrum. I fought myself on for about 10 hours, if I'm being totally honest. I finally landed somewhere I feel okay about it. And I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll talk about my rankings right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different games that we just didn't have a chance to get to yesterday. Definitely wanted to highlight some teams as we get into the off-season. Definitely a lot of teams that had some really incredible years, but were just a little bit overshadowed. So I want to give them some love really quickly. Illinois, Duke, a lot of those teams that did a really incredible job this year. But let's get into these. Definitely a very interesting rankings today. A lot of different movement after a crazy week 14, but I feel relatively good about this one. First, I'll get this out of the way to start. Miami is my number 16 team. They are a little bit out of this list. I was not super high on them going into this weekend. The defense proved me right, and they proved me right really the entire year. So they're right on the outside looking in. Maybe if I didn't put a G5 team in here, they could have been that 15 spot. But my 15 spot is going to be Boise State. I think I flirted with Tulane just a little bit. I was misled just a little bit by Tulane. I absolutely love that team. I think they're still a really great team, but they stumbled this past weekend. Boise State does take their spot here in. They have the best running back, one of the best players in the country in Ashton Jeanty. They have a defense that can really get after you. And all the craziness that is Ashton Jeanty, we have totally forgotten just how good this defense is. This team is absolutely for real. A win puts them in the CFP, maybe even gives them a bye, and then you're in a position where maybe you're a little bit rested playing a team that might be a little bit roughed up. It's one of those formulas that could benefit Boise State. I don't necessarily expect them to go on a run in the playoff, but definitely a team, when you have that player on the football field, a lot of things can happen for you very quickly. Iowa State's my 14 team. I think this is a team that just does not get enough love, if I'm being totally honest. I think this team plays really, really efficient football. The defense gets absolutely after you, and they have difference makers on the outside. They have that duo that I still think could be one of the most impactful duos in the entire this upcoming weekend and into the playoff. I think they're one of those teams that has that next gear that they can hit. Maybe they'll hit it this weekend. Just got a little bit of great news that we'll talk about here in a second for Arizona State, but they're in a position where they win this weekend, they're in the playoff regardless of where they're positioned. I think they're a dangerous team. I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to outright match up with a lot of the teams that they're going to play. I do think they can go around you. I do think Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel are a mismatch against just about any team in the country. South Carolina, I have at 13. I love this South Carolina team. I really, really enjoyed watching them. The back half of the season, they've been one of the very best teams in the entire country. They lost too many games early, and I hate to say it, I have to lean on head-to-head. There are so many different things that have happened this past little bit with South Carolina and these next two teams I'm about to talk about that I just got to lean on head-to-head. So it's one of those things that if they put in South Carolina tonight, I'd be more than fine with that. But I just couldn't quite do it. I don't necessarily think they're above these teams because when you lose to those teams, you just have to be below them. That's the way that I look at it, and I have Ole Miss here at 12. I think they're a team that is really just in a weird spot, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think they're necessarily in a position where they're likely going to find their way into the field. They're probably playing a bowl game that they likely don't want to play too much, and it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason. Obviously, this was the year that they put a lot into, and you missed the mark just a little bit, but definitely a lot of momentum still around that program, just quite a bit of work to do in the portal this offseason. Alabama at 11. I know this is going to make people mad, and it's going to make people mad tonight when they're in the 11 position, but that's just the way it works out. I think with a 12-team playoff, we're learning more and more. Maybe that's too many teams, but at the end of the day, I think they're a team that has played elite football at different times this year. They are a team that has played not so great football at different times this year, so it's going to be a fight back and forth. I understand both arguments. The way that I see it, they have 4 top 25 wins. They have win over South Carolina. I have to give them the lean right now. I think you could argue South Carolina, you could argue Ole Miss with me, but I'm going to lean on head-to-head, and I'm going to give Alabama the slight edge over Ole Miss as of right now. Arizona State here at 10, a lot of things to like about this Arizona State team, and they just continue to get better. The issue that has just hit them that we talked about a little bit earlier, Jordan Tyson is going to miss the Big 12 championship with an injury. You hate to see it. A really, really talented player, and we talked about it yesterday. When he came into the mix, that felt like when this offense really took off. It felt like when they became one of the more dangerous attacks in the country. Not having him on Saturday is going to be really, really tough. It's going to have to be the Cam Scadaboo show, and we'll see what happens there. But it's a lot to like about this team, and they've been a team that's kind of defied the odds. They're probably going to have to this weekend against Iowa State. SMU here at 9, a really, really good team. I think I've made my take known about SMU. They are really good, and they should be in regardless of what happens this weekend, or this system is totally dumb. Now, the system is already dumb. I think we already understand that, and I'm not necessarily holding my breath for them to let SMU in if they were to lose this weekend, but this is a very special team. Kevin Jennings, when he took over, has become a really, really incredible player, and could become a little bit of a college football legend in the next month or so. Definitely will be interesting to watch what happens this weekend, and then whatever they do in Selection Sunday if SMU were to lose this weekend. Indiana here at 8. This is a team that has done an incredible job. I think they don't necessarily get the love that they deserve because a lot of people have problems with their schedule. A lot of people have problems with different things. I'm sorry. I've watched a million teams lose to inferior teams this year. I've seen a million teams stumble when they shouldn't have. Indiana hasn't, and that's kind of just plain and simple. There's a lot of teams on this list that you can't necessarily point to that marquee win. You also can't point to that really bad loss, and I can for a lot of the other teams on this list. So Indiana is a great team. I think they're very firmly in the mix for the CFP, and then they just got to see what happens. I think they're probably going to be traveling in the first one, so just got to continue to prove people wrong if you're Indiana. Tennessee here at 7. I think this is a really, really good team. I'm still holding out a little bit on them. Thought about moving them a little bit higher, but couldn't quite do it because I'm still worried about that pass game. They found it a little bit on Saturday. I've seen it in flashes throughout the season. Haven't quite seen it over a couple of weeks. We'll have to wait quite a bit to see that. I do think the playoff obviously will be their next game. I don't know if they're hosting or going somewhere. It'll be something we're watching for tonight. But this D-line and the explosive offense, very dangerous combo, and definitely one of those teams that if they were to get into the mix, especially hosting a game, could be a very dangerous team in the CFP. Ohio State, I'm putting here at 6. I understand dropping them lower. I understand dropping them down to 7 or 8. I genuinely am looking at this as they have a Michigan problem. They have a very specific problem with that team in maize and blue that they won't have in the playoff. Now, I do think the O-line is going to be an issue. I do think Will Howard not necessarily being able to downright take over a game could be a difference in this season. So I have my worries about Ohio State. I'm not necessarily throwing that Michigan game totally to the side. But I do think not seeing that maize and blue on the other side is going to make a difference for this team. I think they're more than fine. If they were to host a playoff game, I would be more than fine with that. And then I think they'd be a really dangerous team once they got there. It'll be interesting to see how all that unfolds tonight. But as of right now, I think Ohio State, you're not great, not by any means. You're in a better position than a lot of people are giving you credit for. I still think this is a very good team. I just think they have whatever problem they have with Michigan right about now. Notre Dame here at 5, they look like one of the more confident teams in the country right about now. There were rocky moments at times on Saturday, but they're a very, very elite team. They're able to absolutely travel in these road environments and play really good football. That defense is a little bit up and down, or it was up and down on Saturday. Not necessarily been up and down all year. Definitely been one of the more talented defenses in the country. The Benjamin Morrison injury is definitely something I'm watching very closely. It's been a fairly obvious absence from him, and definitely a player that gives a lot to that defense. So I think Christian Gray's done a great job in his absence. They're definitely going to have a couple of big-time battles with some really good wide receivers in the CFP, so definitely something to watch. That being said, they might just have the best player on the field, no matter who they play. Jeremiah Love is absolutely incredible. He does things that athletically I didn't know was physically possible with pads on your shoulders, but he can do it. He's absolutely incredible, and definitely one of those guys, when you have that type of playmaker and that type of defense, you can do a lot of special things. It'll be really awesome to see what this team can do. I still think there are a lot of people holding out a lot of questions about this team, but as of right now, they're playing really good football, and that defense is one of the very best in the country. Georgia here at 4. They are absolutely flawed, and we saw it on Friday. I would understand dropping them below Notre Dame here. I couldn't quite do it. I think they're as dangerous as a team as there is in the country. I think when you look at the top level that they've been able to play at different times this year, it's been a little bit few and far between. I'm not arguing that, but there's definitely been moments where they played about as good a football as really anyone in the country. That Texas game, really that Tennessee game for much of it, they played really, really good football. I think they're still a dangerous team. And I think with Carson Beck rolling, I think this defense just needs to lock back in. I think they're a very talented group. Obviously some issues that weren't there in the past years, but definitely still a group that I think can tighten it up. I think can play good enough football. And then if that offense can pick up the slack that they weren't early in the season, I still think there's a team that can absolutely win a national title. Obviously some issues that I didn't think we'd be talking about with Georgia right now, but they're still in a very good position. And as long as those receivers can catch the football, they're in pretty good shape offensively. Penn State here at 3. They're the team that I think all of us are still questioning just a little bit, but I think they're good enough to win a title. I think when you talk about so many different of the teams this year, you're saying there's not quite a national title team, and they're not in other years, and I understand that. I think Penn State, if you take them back to last year or 2 years before that, they're almost definitely not a national title team. They're not playing the teams of last year. They're playing the teams of this year, and there's no elite team around the country. They absolutely can win this thing. I think they're in a position where you take care of the ball and you take it away on the other side the way that they do really, really well. Maybe they're a dangerous team that can possibly make a little bit of a run. Maybe it starts this weekend with a win over Oregon. Texas here at 2. This is the team that seems to be rolling to me right now. Obviously, that offense is not quite as explosive and crazy as you really want it to be. The run game is very, very effective. With Trey Wisner and all those running backs, the offensive line is imposing their will. And then you also have a ton of other things on defense. I mean, when you can play that level of defense and when you can run the ball to that level, you're going to be able to do a lot of things. I don't think there's any team in the country that is going to be able to outright stop them in the run game, outright be able to score 40 points on them or anything crazy. They're going to be in a lot of these games. As long as Quinn Ewers can continue to just slowly scale that performance, I think they're in a really good spot. And I think we saw it on Saturday in different moments. He's definitely ready for those big-time moments. That second quarter was really incredible football. Third quarter left a little bit to be desired, but as long as they can avoid mistakes, this defense is going to get them in a very good position to possibly win a national title. And then Oregon. They're the best team in the country. They continue to prove that every single week. They're really only 1 week. Since week 3, that was truly ugly. It was the Wisconsin weekend, and that made total sense. It was 8 straight games. It was the third time on the road in 5 weeks. It made sense to me why they were struggling a little bit there. They are complete. They're a really great team. The season just started for them. It just started over. They are officially 0-0, and they got to play Penn State and then possibly be in the driver's seat for a national title. This has been an incredible, incredible job from Dan Lanning. I think we all understand, though, you can go 13-0 all you want. You lose that first playoff game, it's a disappointing year. So it's definitely been an incredible year for Oregon thus far. The work just kind of got started for them. But that's my top 15. As it stands right now, I think there's a lot of questions around Alabama and where they should be, around maybe Miami and where they should be. I dropped them a little bit out of my list just because going into this weekend, I was a little bit worried about them, didn't necessarily love them as a team, but they continue to win games, so I put them up there. I just couldn't do it anymore. I don't think this is a Miami team that really has the ability to scale the way that I wanted them to. I think they're a really capable team. The more that I look at them, the more that I see 2023 LSU, where you have a remarkable quarterback, a remarkable offense, and you leave just way too much on the table. So it's one of those teams that I'm more than happy to talk about it and kind of go back and forth. I definitely think it's one of those debates that's going around Miami against those SEC teams, but I just couldn't quite do it. I definitely think they're a really good team, but it'll be interesting to watch what happens tonight. Maybe my rankings are just on. Maybe my rankings are all the way off. Maybe Notre Dame will jump a couple of teams. Maybe Ohio State will fall a little bit further. It'll be interesting to see what happens tonight, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. No doubt about that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every sport you could possibly want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will be back tomorrow to break down the college football rankings, to break down early signing day. A lot of crazy stuff happening tomorrow, so we'll break it down tomorrow, and we'll see you then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.